to our solo training series for the Academy of Self-Defense. In our previous clips, we looked at basic stances of Nihon Goshin, along with some movement drills, our Hamni walk and walking punch. We also looked at some intermediate movement drills that combine all of these stances with different movements and different angles for you to work on. Then we looked at some strikes, both classical Shotokan strikes that are within Nihon Goshin, as well as some two-strike combinations from the fighting stance. Okay. I figure what I do now for a little bit is look at some pantomiming techniques. Pantomiming is a way that I really learned my technique when I was by myself. Without it, I don't think I would have got a good grasp on it as I did early on. And my instructor, Mr. Weber, was a big advocate of this, and I took it to heart. And you can really make this fun, especially now when we're forced to be out of the schools for a while. This is a great way to shore up your technique. You really don't need a partner, but it's got to be in here. You have to really visualize. You have to be a visual person. If you're not, work hard at being one. Okay. All these movements should be done slow, with purpose, with self-correction. I keep talking about self-correction, policing yourself. You got to be honest with this. You got to really look at what you're doing. Whether you're a white belt who just started with me, you're a blue belt, or even a black belt who's been training a while. We all, myself included, could stand correction in all our classical technique. I say that with 100% accuracy. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do small clips. That way they're easy to digest. And I think I will do, for the most part, 2 techniques per clip. I won't make it too crazy, too long, because I know we all have other things we're doing at home right now, trying to be productive while we're at home with this quarantine. So for the first one, we're going to do first set, obviously, first wrist technique, and then jacket grab, okay, which is the first 2 you typically learn as a new white belt in our system. Those of you that aren't familiar with our system, we are Aikido, although I am an advocate of saying that we're more Aikijitsu than we are Aikido. We're definitely nowhere near Hanbu, which I don't say in a very derogatory way at all. Hanbu is great. It's a great representation of the art when done and taught correctly. But we are much more Aikijitsu, much more combative driven, much more smaller circle. And that being said, again, I don't have a lot of experience in traditional Hanbu dojos. I've been to a few, I've been to some seminars. But the way we do it, for sure, is we treat our classical technique as kata. Those of you who have done any karate or Korean arts, any art that has a prearranged fighting form known as a kata is meant for solo practice. So when we teach classical technique, it's from a fixed position. Normally we're in shizentai, we're 1 arm length away from our uke, us being the nage, and it's done from a fixed position, whether most of them are done from wrist grips, whether it's the same side or cross-hand grip, only because that's the best way to learn it. I like to call it our blueprint to our house. Okay, our technique is the foundation of our house. And imagine, if you will, if you're building a house and you every day you go into the contractor or the architect and tell them you want to change something. I don't like this is there, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Every time it changes, well, chances are your house is not going to come out very functional and very sturdy. Okay, so we want to have a known blueprint of a technique. Now, that teaches us the fundamentals from a known entity. It's the most efficient way of doing a technique. Where we start to play with that foundation, where we start to add, you know, the nice marble tile and the granite countertops and the nice lighting and the window covering, you get where I'm going with this analogy, right? Is our applications. There we can start to use that foundation of the technique and make it our own. Especially when you start combining techniques and look at uras, which are reversals. The art comes to life. That's why I get excited to this day on doing classical technique, because I know it leads me to more understanding of the applications. And the more I understand the applications of the technique, then it comes to life every time that I do it. And every time that I teach it, we discover new things, and that's awesome. And I've been doing this close to 28 years now, and I'm still discovering new things. When I go back and visit with my instructor in Tucson, I still get correction on classical technique, and I love it when I get it, even after all this time, because that means there's still more to learn, always more to learn, okay? So take this opportunity to pantomime your technique. Everyone can stand practice under classical. Trust me, every single person in my school, myself included, can use this practice, okay? So the first one is the first wrist technique. And it's done from a cross hand grip. So when you're doing this, imagine your partner actually grabbing you. Feel that grip, okay? I will do it first, then I will explain. Okay. One more time. Other side. Okay. So obviously that's a wrist manipulation. Imagine your partner, your uke, tapping. Imagine all of these nuances, okay? Imagine them moving a little bit with their arm. Imagine you're trying to get that Z on the arm. Imagine all those nuances of technique. You have to do this with your pantomime, okay? So how does this work? It's a cross hand grip. First thing, he or she grabbed my wrist. So I have to now say, okay, you grab my wrist. I'm going to make sure you don't go anywhere. And typically we grab underneath the middle knuckles, not high, because the higher you grab on the hand, the more closer you get to the wrist, and you're actually defeating yourself on that technique. So I want to be able to manipulate the wrist and get a nice bend to get that pain, okay? The more of a Z I get on the arm, the more compression I get on the wrist, and the quicker I will get to that pain threshold where I get to tap, where I get the control, more important, okay? So now, a common mistake is when people are stepping, they leave the hand down here, and then they're hunting underneath to grab the hand and the thumb, the fingers and the thumb, and then they're doing all this in parts, okay? Really, you want to flow this all at once. So as I'm doing this, I want to, as I step, right, so whatever arm is grabbing my wrist, so in this case, my uke is in front of me, they're grabbing me with their right arm on my right wrist. It's a cross hand grip, okay? So I'm gonna step with that same side leg and try not to get caught up on my left or my right is stepping. If I see this arm is grabbing me, then this side is going to step. And I step about an inch away. It's important to step close to the uke on this one. The farther away you are, the less of the Z I get, right? I get this versus this. And this is what I want on this wrist lock, okay? So I have to step close to make that happen. Now remember, in applications, I can fix that by sliding in quickly once I recognize that. But this is classical. It has to be as perfect as you can get on the first step, okay? So as I'm stepping, I drop my weight, I step, and I begin to bring this hand to my hand. I want to make it easier to grab, so I step. This all happens at once. So see that? This is a good thing to practice. Step in low, and as my back foot steps in that hominy, this is where the finger, or the pinky rather, cuts the wrist. Think of this as a sword, and that's the sharp side of the sword. I cut across first, and then I dive forward over that wrist. A lot of people want to grab or lay their palm on the forearm. You don't want to do that. I want to get extension where my wrist is literally diving over the uke's wrist. And think about drawing a circle with your fingers, and I want to touch my own stomach, or if I was wearing a belt, my own obi knot, right? So it's here, and I circle around. And of course, I keep dropping my weight as I do that, okay? So it's, okay? And watch it from the back. Okay, and I'll do it from this angle. Again, try to do it super slow sometimes, really slow. Exaggerate, think of it as being as a Tai Chi move, okay? So, okay. If you do these slow, you'll get that muscle memory we keep talking about. It'll start burning in. Again, once you do this, look underneath and make sure that your hominy is on. If you're too narrow, fix it. Stay there for a second, okay? So again, once you're done, look. Am I 45? Am I shoulder width apart? Did I come across enough to get that Z? Is my thumb underneath? Am I grabbing correctly? Did I circle and dive with the wrist? Those are the details you want to look for in classical technique, especially when you're pantomiming. I know it's not the same without having someone there, but I'll tell you what, I guarantee you, you're going to get something out of that technique you typically don't get with a partner. That concentration, that self-policing or that self-awareness of movement, okay? Okay, now let's look at the jacket grab, which is usually the second classical technique a new student will learn. This is the same wrist manipulation as the first wrist technique, we just get there a little bit differently, okay? Also, we introduce a different grip here. This is a lapel grip. So grabbing the lapel of the gi, somebody grabbing your t-shirt, your jacket, scarf, whatever it may be, okay? And of course, that's for classical applications. They can go into all kinds of, or response to all kinds of attacks, okay? Where the first wrist technique is really only if your wrist is grabbed. That's really the only technique we have that I can think of right now off the top of my head, that it's only that one where you can only do it for grip. This one, the jacket grab, can be done from all types of scenarios, okay? So I'll do it first, then I'll explain. Okay, and of course, this is where we get the tap. Okay, so someone's grabbing my lapel. This is where the two stances come into play. The first time a new student is asked to do two stances and flow one from the other. And if you remember back to our stances and movement videos, you can go back to that and look at it again and see what this most efficient way to move between them, okay? So imagine the uke is grabbing me with their right hand. I'm stepping again like the first wrist technique on the same side. So if they grab me with their right arm, my left leg or the same side leg would be stepping. My opposite arm is coming across to this part of the hand, to thumb on top in the webbing of the thumb and the forefinger, and my rest of my fingers are underneath the pinky to get a good handle, be able to twist the hand over. So I'm stepping, and this first step is meant to have kuzushi, or meaning unbalancing of the opponent. So I want him kind of falling into me, right? So this is step one, drop my weight into a hamni. Number two, back heel is going to turn out so the front foot can slide. It has a path. That's the secret to this technique. If you don't do that, you've got to step around your foot and you've got to guess where that good front stance is. And after a while, you could probably do it. But in the beginning, it really messes people up and their front stances are off, okay? So I'm here, one, elbow pointing. That way it discourages anybody rushing at you. Slide the back heel. Slide the foot in and then back out. As you settle that leg and straighten up that knee into the front stance, that's where you turn the hand over. So now I have a firm grip on the hand. Their pinky is facing up. My key finger is up. We call this our key finger. This hand now grabs the elbow and tightens up the compression on the wrist and get a tighter Z. If you do this correctly and all at once, the ukes or the attacker's arms should already be bent and they should be running into you from that initial kuzushi movement, okay? If it's not enough, that's why at the very end, you want to grab and get that tighter Z. Now, once I have that Z, I bow to them slightly and I turn this finger like I'm turning the water on in the wrist, and I lean in slightly to get that extra little oomph to the technique, okay? So there's a lot going on here, and this is a hard one for beginners to get. And this is why it's in the first set. This is why we teach it the first couple techniques, because it gets people used to a lot of things happening. Lower body, two stances, arms doing different things. And it takes a while for the new student to get this one, okay? And that's okay. So from here, 1, 2, 3, okay? From this position, from the back, and from this side. And one more time from here on the other side. And notice, this is one of my pet peeves when I'm teaching, when I'm testing people, is everyone wants to grab, they want to do this. They want to grab the arm before they step. I don't like that. It's not correct, because if you're grabbing and you're leaning, and then you can't bring the momentum backwards and get them to run into you. I'm not sure how I can show this, but I will. I would tell students, imagine this technique. If you had your wrist bent and you ran at that wall as fast as you can, you crashed against it. What would that do to your wrist? That's the same feeling the attacker should have on this when they're coming at you. Okay, so one more time. And there's your tap. That is the jacket grab, second of our classical technique series in our first set. Real quick, those of you that aren't familiar with NGA, we break up our techniques into 10 techniques per set per belt. So we have 50 classical techniques. If you add in all the possible applications for all these 50 techniques, we have thousands of combinations of possibilities, which is why I love this art, because it can grow exponentially. And if you do as I have, you start introducing other arts and methodologies into it, it really opens up a plethora of options. So I hope you enjoyed that. Next we'll look at the elbow chop and arm bar. Thank you.